right, Mr. Gray, you're up.
Thank
And
you,
welcome.
sir. Thank you, sir. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Today, on behalf of Austin Homeless Strategies and Operations, we are proud to introduce our first strategic plan, a milestone that represents both reflection as well as resolve. Over the past 2 years, together, we've built extraordinary momentum in our quest to end homelessness in Austin. ECHO, our Continuum of Care lead agency, reported that our homeless response system housed more than 3,000 people last year, an all-time high. We reduced wait times for housing by 25%, and for the first time in 5 years, we saw a reduction in new homelessness. We've launched prevention programs that are now the greatest source of support for homeless families and students, and we forged new partnerships with local landlords to open more doors to housing more people. We've transformed how permanent supportive housing services are delivered in our community. And we've strengthened coordination of street outreach and encampment closures alongside city departments and community partners. And this past winter, we've served an all-time high number of neighbors through our cold weather shelter operations, delivered in partnership with the Urban League, and protecting hundreds of people from life-threatening conditions. We've accomplished all this in less than 2 years, and this strategic plan will serve as our compass for the next 2. It's how we will build on what's working, scale what's proven, and stay accountable to measurable results. It will sharpen our focus, deepen our partnerships, and ensure that urgency and compassion continue to guide every decision that we make. I want to acknowledge our partners for their ongoing collaboration and shared resolve. I want to thank my staff, some of whom who are here today, for their daily stewardship of our programs and their relentless commitment to our mission. To our clients, I want to thank you for trusting us with your care and your well-being. Your resilience drives this work forward. And to the greater Austin community, thank you for your support and for holding us accountable to our highest ideals. This plan reflects momentum, but more importantly, it reflects belief. Belief that homelessness is solvable, that systems can improve, and that when we move together as a community, we can ensure more of our neighbors have stability, dignity, and a place to call home. Before we get into the plan itself, we think it's important to acknowledge what a strategic plan is for our office and why we developed one. In short, our strategic plan serves as a time-bound, evolving roadmap for the future, a collection of intentional decisions used as a guide to achieve our vision. And why is this important? It's important because it provides clarity on our role within the homeless response system for all of our stakeholders, including those who we serve, our partners, other city departments, and the community at large. But for me, most importantly, for our team, especially as a newly formed city department charged with aligning policies, investments, and partnerships across our complex system. A strategic plan is a document that's not developed in one day. It's a process that can take anywhere from 3 to 8 months. And the more comprehensive ones are typically developed in that latter range, which was the case for us. The bulk of our planning occurred over 8 months, where we worked together to develop our guiding principles, define our core values, understand our purpose, and refine our vision and our mission. And informed by stakeholder analysis, it clarifies our role within the homeless response system. With this foundation, we were then better equipped to identify goals and strategies. I also want to note that over 50 hours of work went into the collaborative thought process of developing this plan. More than half of our staff, including all of our leadership team and representatives from each of our subunits, comprised our core planning team. And the rest of our staff were involved throughout the year, given multiple opportunities to meaningfully contribute and provide their valuable input. Through stakeholder analysis and internal assessments like our SWOT analysis and eco-cycle mapping, we candidly assessed and reflected on our strengths, our shortcomings, and our evolving roles and responsibilities. In many ways, I want to note that this process was as important as the final plan itself, because it demonstrated that our strategy is not something dictated by me or handed down from on high, but it's something that we truly built as a team together. Through our thoughtful process over those several months, involving all those staff discussions and reflections on what leadership means and what our community needs most from us, we developed our guiding principles. Our vision, which is to ensure that everyone has access to stable housing and the support they need to thrive. We also developed our mission, which is to serve as the citywide strategic leader to address homelessness in Austin through effective policies, investments, and partnerships. And then we identified our 3 core values, which are to act with integrity, to remain results-oriented, and to be collaborative. These guiding principles are the compass for every decision we make as an office. They provide the foundation to ensure accountability and alignment, so we're not just reacting, but that we're guided by shared values and a clear sense of purpose. And so with this foundation in place, we were then able to move into the components of our plan, starting with identifying our focus areas. And for that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Marisa Vogel, who is our office's capacity building manager and who played the leading role in working with our staff and with our community partners to develop this strategic plan. So Marisa, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, David. These 5 focus areas are where we believe we can make the greatest impact. For each focus area, we asked, what does success look like? These statements capture our vision and guided the development of our goals and strategies. They provide a framework to ensure that the work is aligned and measurable. They represent our North Star, keeping us focused on priorities that matter. Within each focus area, we developed the goals and strategies, which I will now summarize in the next few slides. Under system leadership, our goals are centered around working collaboratively to strengthen the entire homelessness response system. Focusing on leadership and coordination, examples to achieve these goals include aligning strategies and funding across the system, creating collaborative spaces for key interventions, using data and data analysis to guide decisions, and elevating voices of people with lived experience to ensure our solutions reflect community realities. As the largest funder in the homelessness response system, we must invest in solutions that prevent homelessness and create lasting housing stability. And we need to be effective stewards of city resources. Under this focus area, our strategies include making smart, impactful investments and monitoring performance, streamlining our contracting process for efficiency, continuing to invest in prevention and diversion programs to keep people housed, and strengthening rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing so participants can achieve long-term stability. Operating and managing the city-owned shelters puts us in the leading position to build a responsive crisis system that meets the urgent needs of those experiencing homelessness while also supporting housing transitions. These goals are focused on addressing immediate needs and crisis response, and our strategies include developing a citywide outreach coordination plan, expanding shelter capacity by 650 beds, adding navigation centers to help reduce barriers, and working to improve shelter efficiency and refining encampment strategies to reduce harm. We recognize that communication is key to establishing trust and aligning efforts across the system, and that trust is earned through transparent two-way communication. And from our stakeholder interviews, it was clear they want to hear more from us. Our strategies to address these goals include launching a centralized platform for transparency of our work and investments, bringing back town halls and utilizing feedback systems to engage the community, and communicating progress on our plan through an annual report. Finally, behind every successful organization is a strong, supported team. As a new and growing department, we recognize that our plan's success is dependent on creating an innovative culture and supportive workplace to drive impactful change, an environment that not only empowers our team, but provides the structure and resources that centers on growth, development, and well-being. To achieve these goals, we will prioritize standardizing our onboarding process for new hires, providing cross-unit training and professional development opportunities, creating feedback mechanisms for staff engagement, promoting wellness and growth opportunities, and reassessing our organizational design to align roles and priorities and to reduce silos. We recognize that implementing this plan is a continuous cycle of action, measurement, and improvement. To guide us, we have developed key performance indicators, or KPIs, that are aligned with our strategic goals within each of our focus areas. These KPIs serve as measurable benchmarks that help us track progress, assess impact, and ensure accountability across our initiatives. These on the slide are just a sample of some of our measures that we'll be monitoring regularly, using insights to refine strategies and inform future planning. Additionally, we will be identifying targets associated with each of these identified indicators. Currently, we are in the execution phase of this plan, which includes assigning team leads and team members for each of our strategies. This is actually opened up to our entire staff as a learning opportunity. Prioritizing our strategies and developing timelines, and also developing project plans to guide our execution. And then beginning in March, the leadership team will start quarterly reviews to monitor our progress. A couple important notes. Several of the strategies in our plan are well underway. They likely looked familiar to you because they incorporate initiatives that we are already working on in 2025. In addition, we also considered our work on the citywide strategic plan, making sure that our plan was aligned with the strategies and measures identified through this overarching citywide strategic planning process. So with that, I would now open it up to questions and, of course, welcome any comments or feedback. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to present our plan to you today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Gray. Members, if you wish to be recognized, let me know, and I'll call on you. Councilmember Fuentes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. It is an exciting day for us to see and to receive more information about the strategic plan when it comes to addressing our homelessness response system. That has been a key priority for our council for a number of years now. So I'm wondering if you could just take us a step back, because I certainly, everything in the plan that you laid out, I think makes sense and I agree with and support. The one area I just want to dig a little bit deeper in knowing just how critical the effort in addressing homelessness, the city of Austin cannot go at it alone. You know, we cannot be the main entity funding and addressing homelessness. And we know we're not. There's certainly investments from our partners at the county, at Central Health, at Integral Care. Everyone has a role and support, including our faith community and our business community as well. And so I'm just curious, it seems what you've laid out here really leans the city into crisis response mode and focusing specifically on emergency shelter. And when I take a look at that, I think about, okay, yes, that makes sense. What about the other key investments that the city has made, especially in these last few years with prevention, with rapid rehousing, with diversion programs? What does that look like? And can you just talk us through kind of the thought process and the positioning of the city focusing in on emergency shelter?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Council Member. So all of those other elements of our homeless response system are important to us, and each of those things is mentioned in some way in the plan. I know there's been a lot of attention in recent media about the shelter component, but I want to be clear that we're also not losing focus on the importance of our diversion programs, which, as I mentioned, have been the largest source of rehousing families and students in our community. We're also making sure we're paying attention to the needs of our clients in our rapid rehousing and our permanent supportive housing investments as well. You know, our homeless response system functions like a human body. All the components are critical to the success of the whole. We're not going to chop off a foot to keep a hand or chop off an arm to keep a leg. We want to make sure that all of our homeless response system is uplifted. And so this strategic plan does that. And we're happy to sit and meet with you and your staff to really go through and highlight where those other investment areas are in the plan, and how we're making sure to keep special attention on those other investment areas.
Thank you for that. And just really acknowledging kind of the cliff that we're under as a city, as we know our budget situation, and knowing that we have a number of permanent supportive housing units coming online in the next few years, and the critical need for us to have the funding for the supportive services of permanent supportive housing. So I just want to make sure that is, and thank you for affirming it is reflected, but just in a way that really keeps us, with our foot on the gas pedal in how we address homelessness. And but I really appreciate your leadership, and I'm grateful for y'all's hard work. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Lane, Councilmember Alter.
I also want to thank you for this work. It's so important to have a document that we can all look at the higher strategic level. And I know it's been a very challenging time to work in this particular area with all the changes to funding. So great appreciation for the work that you've already done. I do have a couple of questions. One of them does relate to Councilmember Fuentes' point about, and yours as well, Director Gray, about the need to work effectively with our partners. And I would add on the need to build capacity among partners in areas of the city where there's been a substantial growth in homelessness, or the type of homelessness isn't aligned with the traditional idea of homelessness as impacting primarily single men. And at a time of cuts, it's really hard to think about where we aren't reaching and how to integrate that in. And yet it's even more important if there are areas of growth that the plan lays out how we are reaching and working in these new ways. And so it's these areas that my questions are related to. Looking at the stakeholder interview list on page 17, I'm wondering how you are expanding this list going forward. I mean, obviously, this is a moment in time.
Yep.
How did you map it, and how are you expanding it?
Thank you, Councilmember. I'll turn it over to Marisa in a bit to talk about how that initial stakeholder list was identified, and I want to give her and Natasha, who's sitting behind us, a lot of credit. They conducted all of those interviews in a matter of a couple of weeks, and so definitely a hard but dedicated lift on behalf of the staff. A number of the items in the strategic plan talk about partnerships and the importance of partnerships, and continuing to meet with partners, talking about how we align our investments, align our focus, stay up to date on what's the emerging priority for each group. And so as our action teams are formed to implement the various components of the strategic plan, a big focus of those action teams is going to be holding that space and leaning into those partnerships and getting some clarity too on where do those partners see their role and their unique contribution to helping us resolve homelessness in our community, and where's the cities and where does the cities line in? Because I think a point that you made is a key one, which is that it really takes all of us to address homelessness, and especially as the needs of homelessness in our community evolve, and as we see an increase in areas or communities that aren't just single men, it's important that we lean into partnerships, like partnerships with all of our school districts to address student homelessness, like our partnerships with our veteran organizations to address veteran homelessness. So I really appreciate the question, but I want to give Marisa an opportunity to talk about the initial stakeholder engagement process, how that list was constituted, and how we envision building on that foundation from 2025 as we rolled out the implementation of this plan this year.
Yeah, I think what I would say is that list was created obviously internally. When we started this process, thinking through timeline, we knew we didn't want to have a full comprehensive stakeholder list necessarily. It was like, can we take a cross-section of it and get a really good high-level sort of overview, understanding of what the stakeholders are saying, what they think about us, what they think our role is, and use that as kind of our metric. I don't think it was definitely, well, I know it wasn't intentional in not excluding specific organizations. Again, it was about, can we get small and large? And so we did actually vet that through internally with several folks on our team. So that's how this list was developed for the 36. I think in the future, you make a really great point. I think I would love to see us be able to do a more comprehensive stakeholder analysis, which would also probably include more than interviews, but focus groups. So that is some great feedback to consider for next time. But again, most of it was around time constraints and resource constraints on developing this 36 list. But we hope we got a good cross-section.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And noting, for example, Director Gray, you mentioned the need to work with school districts. And so when I was reviewing this list, I noticed that the Families in Transition offices, which are the state mandated single point of contact for a school district on homelessness, I'm not seeing that type of thing in the list. And I think I also think when we're looking for creative problem solving and doing it different ways, it really does mean engaging with new entities as well who may be doing that type of work. And I think also to the homemade nonprofit that works with houses of worship who are interested in adding beds. And I know that they were very active in a property on 620 adjacent to my district in the ETJ. And I think I was the third council person that they had reached out to. So they've been trying to get that done for a decade. And so that type of nonprofit, I have asked my staff to put together a list of other ideas that I will send to you. And the other piece of this, I think, is the city has a long history of working with many partners. We certainly heard from a lot of them at the Austin Public Health meeting, and it's quite challenging right now. But when there is change, when there's change in where the population is, like where is it increasing, what types of people are we seeing, I think it's really important that as we're making these shifts, we also build in the ability of these nonprofits that we have already funded and worked with extensively to help build capacity with some of these other entities. And I think probably the biggest thing that surprised me not to see on here as I think about my own district is Charlie Center being certainly a well-recognized provider, the only one serving this area. And I know that we did experience during budget, even a small request being challenging to figure out how to work into the plan. And so I see a lot of signs that it is definitely critical to expand this list. If we are, in fact, going to meet the challenges of the increasing number of women and children who do not have stable housing, the changes in where the homeless population is living in our city, and the challenges that they face both with connecting with services, but also these transportation issues that we just heard about as well. So thank you for your work, and I look forward to continuing it together. Thanks.
Thank you, Council Member. And our team looks forward to receiving the list of additional stakeholders from your office. So I really appreciate you and your staff for doing that work to put that together for us. And so we'll make sure to follow up to get that list from you.
You'll have it by the end of the week. Thanks so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Councilmember. Councilmember Alter?
Thank you so much. I think this document, the idea around it is so important because we have had so many conversations, not just around homelessness, but whatever department, of what are our priorities, right? How are we going to balance the resources we have with the priorities that we have? And so I want to really just start this conversation looking at slide 2, which was, the what and the why, right? And you mentioned there on the what that this not only sets priorities, but it guides decision-making and investments. And I think that's really important for us because this is our opportunity to put forward what are our priorities. How do we want you to make investments? Because it's not your job to come to us every time you have to make a decision. Should I do this or that or this? That's the point of this process. We set the policy. You make it happen. And so I want to understand from you within this plan, do you see it as kind of the tool you would look to where if you said, I have $1 to spend. I have lots of different things I could spend it on, but I have $1 to spend. How am I going to spend it? Does this inform that decision?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. So this informs that decision in much the same way that the citywide strategic plan informs our decision making. It's something that we always look at when we're going to the city manager's office with a funding request or to you all. Currently, one of the first checks we do is we say, is this in the citywide strategic plan, or does it support any other policy plan adopted by council? And if so, then we continue with further evaluation and decision making. And there's a whole host of other criteria that we look at before bringing those recommendations. We look at the data. Is there a population that needs this? What's going on with other funding sources? Right now we're in conversations with HSO anticipating tectonic shifts in federal funding for permanent housing and other supports in our community. So in short, the strategic plan does serve to inform decision-making around spending decisions and how we allocate staff time and all those things. But there are also other things that we would consider before coming to council with a request or making an administrative decision that we would have to defend in some form or fashion.
Right. And so as we are refining this, I think one thing, and we've talked about this, we've talked about it in public health, I think it's really important for us to have a very high-level goal to explain to the public where we're headed, right? If we make these investments, if we do these things, this is the result you will see. And the result that everyone sees every day is, how many people are unsheltered, how many people are unhoused, and understanding that we can tell people if we make these choices, if we make these investments, in 1 year, this is where our goal is, whether that is to have stabilized and hopefully then start a downward trajectory, or setting that target. Same with a more out year. In 5 years, here's where we want to be. We're not going to solve this overnight, but this is where we're headed. And I think that higher level metric, I think it belongs in the, not this strategic plan, but our overall citywide, strategic plan, the goals within there, because that should really be our North Star. And you've talked about it, right? The goal of this is so that everyone has access to housing. That's not going to happen, like I said, overnight. But what is our path to get there, right? How long? What are the investments? What are the steps necessary? So I would love for us to chew on that a little bit as to where we as a body, what do we define as success? If we're here next year and you're reporting your results under this plan and you tell us that we had the same number of unsheltered individuals then as we do today, I think that'd be a pretty big win. We need to stem the tide before we go down. But is that our goal? Is that, so that's not a question, but just kind of a statement of how we refine this document to really communicate with the public what is our expectation, our goals. I am curious, touching on a little bit of what Councilmember Fuentes mentioned, there are some very specific elements in this around shelter and crisis services. But the references to housing, whether that's rapid rehousing, supportive housing, they're more generic. And for instance, you have a hard target of 650 units of shelter. When we talk about housing, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, it's increased access or more resources. So how do you balance those? You mentioned you're not going to cut off your foot to save your hand, right? We want to have the whole body. Unfortunately, we don't have all the dollars. So what's the balance? Where do you see this balance?
Thank you, Council Member. So first, I think to the question of why do some things have very specific figures and some things don't, when it comes to the rapid rehousing and the permanent supportive housing, right now, given changes that are happening at the federal level that could have some pretty major consequences for what those programs look like at the local level, we're giving ourselves the benefit of a little bit more time necessary to work with those action teams, work with HSO, work with our provider community to identify the specific targets for what those investments would look like. we could come up with a very specific number today or over the course of the next month if we needed to, but that number might drastically shift by the end of the calendar year if HUD implements the changes to the continuum of care funding that they tried to implement at the end of 2025. So what we want to do is acknowledge that those investment areas are important for us, while also living in the reality that we don't know enough information just yet about the things that we don't control to have a true sense of what we could expect to deliver in the areas that we do control, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I completely respect that. I think it's just hard to measure, right? Like we could come back in 2 years or however many years that target is, and we know if you've built 650 beds, right? How do we know if you've strengthened rapid rehousing or increased access to permanent supportive housing, right? I think I get that you might not want to tie a specific number, but if there are more concrete deliverables so that we can measure, did we do it, did we not? Mm-hmm. And one of those you and I talked about, I think, identifying a consistent funding stream for PSH services, right? That is, there's no dollar number attached to that. There's no for how many units, right? But that is clearly something we need to do before we even expand our PSH capacity. So if there are ways that we can have very specific deliverables, even though they're not tied to a number, I think that'd be very helpful in just guiding.
Yes, sir. And so, towards the end of Marisa's segment of the presentation, she kind of touched on this, but I'll take it a step further. For us, the strategic plan is an actionable document. It's not just some rosy plan that we present today and never look at again. And the way that we are executing on this document is by creating action teams for each goal element. And those action teams are going to really dig in and identify the major milestones that lead to the ultimate goals, and then do the work with our office and with our leadership team to track where are we on target in achieving milestones or where are we off target. Marisa also touched on every quarter as a leadership team, we'll be gathering the information, looking at our milestones, assessing our progress and where we're failing, and we're happy to share the information with you all. But I say all that to say those milestone development and those goal setting, that's all built into how we're bringing this plan to life. So we definitely share the concern. We don't want to come back next year or at any point in time, frankly, and provide you with a bunch of data that's not oriented towards some outcome that you could measure our performance against. And so we will do that work. I think the point is heard loud and clear. So I'll take that back with the team, and we'll work on some updates before this plan returns for final adoption.
Excellent. I want to shift gears a little bit and just understand there was a discussion around data, and in the plan itself, you really talk a lot about how you're going to leverage HMIS. I'm curious how, taking a step back just on where we are today, and one of our speakers today talked about use of coordinated entry for shelter placements. We do that for some, we don't do that for others. Is it y'all's belief, either within this planning process or as you've just thought about kind of our shelter program, do you think we have the balance right? Do you think we need to use more coordinated entry or HMIS for shelter placement? Less? What is your kind of assessment of the current state of play?
I appreciate the question. Thank you, sir. I think as of today, kind of where we're at with our shelter bed count, I think the way that we are trying to balance our shelter bed availability with all the competing demands for space makes sense. Some of our shelter capacity is reserved for our HEAL initiatives and our state and locally mandated encampment cleanups. If we did not have those beds reserved for those purposes, when we go in to clean up an encampment, we would not have a place to send those people to. You might recall during the surge cleanup when we were able to get, I think, 20 or 25% of the folks who we encountered connected to shelter our services. that number probably would have been closer to 0 if we did not have the dedicated shelter capacity for the encampment cleanup. And so that's what some of our shelter capacity is for. Some of the capacity is also reserved for our law enforcement and our EMS personnel, which helps us divert putting people in jail or bringing them to an ER if we can get them into shelter and have their needs triaged and met there. We do also have shelter beds that are available for the general public, and folks are aware that they can call into the Sunrise Navigation Center hotline to be put on a wait list for that bed. At the same time, if somebody were to appear on that wait list and they are pregnant or they have a very serious medical condition or some other extenuating circumstance, we have the dynamic process in-house to get that person into the most appropriate resource to meet their needs, whether that's a shelter bed or a central health medical respite bed. Now, when we talk about HMIS and the connectivity to HMIS, ECHO is the HMIS administrator for our continuum of care. They're going to continue to do that role. We are not looking to take any of ECHO's roles or responsibilities. Right now, ECHO is in the process of changing the HMIS platform from its previous platform to a new system called Clarity. Clarity has tools in it that we might be able to leverage to help us enhance our shelter bed coordination, tracking of real-time bed availability, and coordination with our outreach partners. So our staff is deeply engaged in that work with ECHO to see how we can leverage Clarity to enhance access to our shelter beds. But I also want to be very clear that tying all of our shelter beds to a coordinated entry system means we will not have shelter beds for encampment management. And so when your constituents call and they call us and we have to go in and close an encampment, or when DPS or another agency closes an encampment and they contact us asking us where to put people, if everything flows through coordinated entry, there's a greater chance that we will not have space for those people. And I do not think that that's an outcome that we want. So our system is not perfect, but I think our system reflects balance across all of the unique demands for shelter beds. And as we bring more shelter beds online, and as we lean into this new HMIS system, we're committing ourselves to be mindful about how we improve the access to shelter beds and how we improve coordination across anybody doing outreach, that they know where beds are available and how to get their clients into those beds that are available.
And do you either under this plan, or have you previously looked at a sampling, or, we had 500 clients run through our shelter. These are the ones who were near the top of the coordinated entry list and their successful exits versus, a cohort who were not near the top and their successful exits, basically to try to understand that if we did make a move more towards coordinated entry, you would potentially have more people moving through the shelter, not getting stuck in the shelter with a successful exit, right? And that's what we're all interested in, is that they end up with some kind of successful exit. So is that something that is either has done or planned to be done, just to kind of understand how we can maximize our limited resource?
Yeah, that's something that we can definitely look into. We have not done that type of analysis before. I will say, just kind of knee-jerk reaction is, we have a lot of folks who come into our shelters who have never done a coordinated assessment. And they do the coordinated assessment at the shelter. And then at that point, we might find out that those folks are eligible at the top of the list for PSH or rapid rehousing. Those folks wouldn't be served that resource, but for the fact that we got them into shelter and did that CA. If we didn't bring those folks in the shelter because we were only bringing in folks who have completed it, those folks are probably still out on the street waiting for somebody to come in and do their assessment for them. I think it's also important to note, too, that the longer that somebody waits on the street, kind of the worse their condition becomes. Our shelters pride themselves on having multiple points of exit for people. We do exit a lot of people to permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing programs, but we also do a lot of rapid exit. We do a lot of family reunifications. We do a lot of one-off, short-term assistance to help people move in independently on their own. And I like to think that those types of exits are important too, because it's a lower cost to our taxpayers, it's a quicker resolution for the client, and it truly demonstrates that if you are somebody on the streets, there are multiple ways and opportunities for us to help you. But like I mentioned, we will go back and we'll do the analysis that you've referred to us. And so I'll work with our policy team to do that analysis and try to get a report back to you.
Sure. And my very last thing, I would, once again, as we kind of think through our goals here, how we want to address our, and you've touched on this, some of our subpopulations, whether it's veterans, families, young people, seniors, understanding once again, unfortunately, we can't do everything, right? And there are certain individuals who, if we help, and I'm thinking particularly of young people, if we can address their homelessness early, that's 50, 60 years that they potentially are not going to be requiring the resources that many individuals are, right? And so being strategic about, once again, we have that $1, where do we put it? We would love to serve everybody, but we can't. And so how do we get the most bang for the buck? And I hate to reduce it down to dollars and cents, because we're talking about people, and we want to make sure that everyone has every opportunity to have the most basic thing, which, you know, a bed, a pillow, a roof over their head. But that's not where we are. And so how can we, you know, if we can put a family of 4 in a house instead of a single individual, you know, that family of 4 is going to rise to the top, right? In my opinion. So just looking at some of those various targeted subpopulations, want to think through how we put that in this plan. But I really appreciate the work. I think there's some really great stuff. You know, I didn't even talk about the navigation center item. I think that's great. Some of the other parts in here are so great. You know, prevention, diversion, rapid exit. You know, y'all are really leaning into that. It's all fantastic. But, you know, we're in a new landscape, and we just have to figure it all out. So I appreciate the work you're doing.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember. Councilmember Duchin.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your work on developing this out and presenting it today. I have just 3 questions. You've heard from some of my colleagues questions about the partnerships and what's laid out in the strategic plan. I'm curious if you're either thinking now or would further define as you've laid out the plan, if there are any specific goals you've got for expanding or outlining, you know, private or philanthropic or other funding metrics that might come in. And the plan seems, you know, in the first part, it seems aspirational to create new funding opportunities in that space, but I'm wondering if you're thinking down the line of do we have KPIs, do we have targets, do we have any sort of breakdown of what that might look like in the future you can share with us?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, Council Member. So within our system leadership focus area, we have some key performance indicators that are tied to the number of new funders within our homeless response system and the increase in funding from our existing partners. We don't have specific targets on that as of yet. Marisa had alluded to, you know, some of the things in this plan are things that we're actively working on. This is one of those areas where we've been actively engaging with a lot of foundations, from the established kind of corporate foundations to the very small family foundations, and learning about their investments in the homeless response space, understanding their interest and ability to enhance those investments, and also how do we attract and bring in new resources to the community. I think Councilmember Alter hit the nail on the head when he said that our funding landscape is very different locally. And we also know that the funding landscape is changing federally. And so attracting those philanthropic dollars and corporate dollars and individual giving is all going to be critical to the success, not just of our strategic plan, but the strategic goals of our partners, whether that's ECHO or Central Health or anybody else who's part of our homeless response system.
Okay, thank you for the answer. I would ask that you keep us looped in as you further clarify what you think that, depending on all the circumstances you just mentioned, the landscape, the federal, local, et cetera, how that might change your whatever goals you're setting or thinking about setting or guidelines for the makeup of where the dollars come from. We also heard from Dr. Bearstein earlier from SAFE, and it's my understanding that they're operating a shelter with hundreds of beds, that contract expires in October, I think, of this year, and that currently that's funded, I think, 2/3 by the city. So I'm just curious, generally speaking, how the shelter fits in with that plan or the strategic plan or vision you've got. I know from discussing with him, it sounds like his aspiration is to figure out how to bring it in HSO. Can you speak to that?
Sure. For that question, I'm going to defer to Assistant City Manager Stephanie Hayden Howard. The contract to which you're referring actually resides in Austin Public Health, which is why I'm going to defer to ACM Hayden Howard.
Thank you.
Good morning. Stephanie Hayden, Assistant City Manager. Stephanie Hayden Howard, Assistant City Manager. Forgot I was married again. He's probably not going to like that.
Yeah, you opened up a whole lot of questions.
Luckily, we're not posted for them.
That's right.
Okay. Councilmember Duchin. Councilmember Duchin, we have received the communication from SAFE. I've already reached out to him on yesterday, and we are going to schedule really more of a kind of comprehensive meeting with him, which will include David Gray, Adrian Stirrup, Deputy City Manager John Fortune, as well as a representative from APD. And so our goal is to really allow him the opportunity to kind of walk through a memo that he has put together and understand the recommendations that he is making, whether it is some beds that may need to be allocated to the emergency shelter line, understanding kind of what he is needing as far as financial support. And then also, since we have relationships with hospitals and hospital administrators, willing to convene folks and have that conversation with him. So we are looking into that, and we'll continue that work and get those meetings scheduled. And then our goal is to follow up with a meeting to a memo to the full council, just to kind of lay that out and talk about our plan to move forward with that. So we are looking at that comprehensively.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. Thank you for that update. And yeah, I was mostly just curious about if the plan speaks at all to the idea or the notion of bringing out, what maybe currently outside shelter beds within the HSO system, and if that's sort of in line with the vision you see this things playing out.
Thank you, Council Member. So our plan talks about new shelter beds and new shelter capacity. Some of those beds would have to be delivered by community partners and community organizations. This plan also talks about our community of folks who do homeless services, some of whom already have contracts with HSO, but some of whom don't. And how do we make space for us to engage those that don't, within our city and within our office. And so the plan touches on that. I wouldn't say directly, but through kind of various elements of the plan, we make room for the opportunities like the ones you're describing.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Last question is, I was a little surprised. It seems like there's not a lot of mention of behavioral or mental health in the plan. I think we found it under the appendix in the glossary. And my understanding is that there's, plays a fairly significant role in the homelessness space. So I'm wondering if you can expand on any details or thought process y'all have for how we intend to approach that issue.
Yes, sir. That's something that I'll go back with the team and look into and possibly make a recommended update on. As you touched on, the behavioral and mental health space is an important priority for us. I've probably talked to our government relations team led by Kerry Rogers at least 3 times a week about how we need to do a better job as a community of folks, city, integral care, state agencies, et cetera, on delivering more access to behavioral and mental health services. I do want to give a lot of credit to our friends at Integral Care. They really leaned into this space with us. I think over the last year, they opened up the psychiatric emergency services unit. We have an item on the council agenda this week to expand the size of the homeless outreach street team, which provides street-level behavioral and mental health access for folks, particularly folks who are experiencing homelessness. And then through our partnerships with APD and others, we've launched programs like the No Wrong Door Initiative, and obviously APD and EMS have launched Austin First. And so this is an area that's a priority for us. I apologize that it was excluded in the plan, and that's probably count that by accident. But I hope there's enough evidence of the actual work that we're doing to demonstrate that we remain focused on ensuring that anybody who has a behavioral health need or a mental health need in our community is able to get access to the right types of treatment for the appropriate duration. And so we're going to continue to push forward in that work.
Thank you. Yeah, if anything, your answer helped clarify my confusion, which is I understood there was a lot of work being done in that space, and it just didn't seem to be reflected entirely in the way the plan was laid out currently. And I just make the same request I did for the first question, which is that if you have updates there as you're thinking through this, to continue to share those with us.
Yes, sir, would.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councilmember Duchin. All right, thanks, everybody, and thank you all, and thanks for the good work. We appreciate you very much. Members,